Let's jump in.
Cool.
Thanks for being here.
No problem.
I'm really thankful that you accepted the invitation. I guess the best place to start is always the beginning, right?
Sure.
So who are you?
Who am I?
Where did this name come from, Theater KAPOW? And let's talk about the genesis of it and the evolution of it.
Sure. I guess a little bit about me personally, which leads to KAPOW eventually. I grew up in New Hampshire, in the southern tier of the state on the Mass border in a little town called New Ipswich. And my family was odd in that we were very athletically focused, but also my parents always kind of had us doing theater stuff, very little. So I was in my first show, I think, when I was 8 at Andy Summer Playhouse, and I was there for 7 consecutive summers doing really amazing work. It's an amazing company still to this day. All original work with kids. Many artists from New York who would come up for the summer and work with us. My first director was Dan Herlin, who was the artistic director at the time, and Dan has gone on to a pretty successful career off-Broadway doing puppetry work primarily, but a lot of different stuff. So I think my initial introduction to kind of the excitement, the immediacy of contemporary theater was at a very young age, in 8 to 15 range. Then I went to school. I went to high school and stopped doing theater for a little while, and then went to college at St. Anselm and got back into theater. And it was there that I met my wife, Carrie, and also my college roommate, Brian Kennedy, and his eventual wife, Rachel Folene, now Rachel Folene Kennedy. The 4 of us all left St. Anselm basically around the same time, within a few years of each other, and went and worked at the Palace. And we were in various capacities. I was the technical director, Brian was the marketing director, Carrie was the development person, Rachel was working in development too. So we were all there, and the Palace, which is a gorgeous facility we're lucky to have in our state, but they primarily do musical theater, and we weren't musical theater people. And so one day in our living room around a bottle of wine, we were like, we want to do something different than Broadway musicals. And we decided at first that we were going to do a show. We were just going to throw a show together with the 4 of us. And our first performance, our first production was Strindberg's Miss Julie. And I remember very clearly soon thereafter, Carrie saying to the group of the 4 of us, so is this just a show or is this now a company? And we all agreed this should be a company. And we get asked all the time, what does Theater KAPOW mean? And it really means nothing. It means, I think, that the work that we do is in your face, is immediate and intimate. And so we kind of went with that KAPOW feel. And it has become certainly a brand of sorts. So that's the way we got off the ground. It was 4 college friends coming together, wanted to do a show. We started off as a company that was dedicated to what we still call presenting the great works of dramatic literature across ages and cultures. And at the time in New Hampshire, there wasn't a lot. We're in a very different atmosphere in terms of our theater community now than we were now almost 12 years ago when Theater KAPOW started. But there weren't a lot of companies doing a lot of different types of work. There was a lot of musical theater. At the time, I was the president of the board of Yellow Taxi Productions, which was a contemporary professional theater company in Nashua. And so they were doing contemporary work. And then what we thought was kind of missing from the New Hampshire community was what we used to say from the plays from 1888 to 1988. Because nobody was doing this long swath of plays, and we had all come out of theater classes in college where we were reading Strindberg and Ibsen and Miller and Williams, and nobody was actually doing those plays outside of educational institutions around the state. So we started to do those plays, and that's kind of how KAPOW took off. And we've changed quite a bit since then, but we started certainly as a group of theater artists interested in interpreting the great works of dramatic literature. And I think that word interpreting is important because I think at a point in our evolution as a company, we became creators and not interpreters anymore, but I could talk about that more.
Yeah, no,
Whatever.
that's fine. Boy, you touched on a lot of things that I wanted to bring up, so that's really good. If you person looks at your website, like I did the other day, what comes across to me is that you folks are very focused on the process, much more than I think 98% of the groups in New Hampshire do. There's a lot of them that just want to throw up a show, they have an audition, and then they basically just rehearse.
Mm-hmm.
They're not as involved in, they call it character development, I think, but I don't really think a lot of it is. Some folks might do some research on a character that they're portraying, maybe.
Right.
You guys really, you're very serious about the process.
Yeah.
And it comes across because I have a thing in my pocket that I'll read later. I don't know if it's your mission statement or whatever, but the end product is that important to you, so important to you, that this process becomes very integral. Can you talk a little bit about
Yeah, absolutely. We are an ensemble theater company. That's how we bill ourselves, and that really means that we're a tight-knit group of artists who value training above almost everything else. We are very process-oriented. We have some rules about how our process works, but we want the show not just to be about the public performance, but to be about the growth of the actor over the 6 or 8 week rehearsal process. And to that end, over the years, the company has invested fairly considerable amount of money in training, not just training ourselves as artists, but also training people in the community. And we get asked all the time, so when's the next Theater KAPOW audition? And oftentimes, the people who are performing in KAPOW shows are coming and training with us first, and that's an informal audition process, and then they're asked to take part in a show, and then they move forward with the company that way. But yeah, absolutely. We talk a lot about what it means to be a trained theater artist in whatever discipline that is. We have people who are trained in improv. My wife's training, Carrie's training, is in something called the Viewpoints, and also in practical aesthetics, which is a method developed by David Mamet. And then Peter Josephson, who's a company member, is very heavily trained in the Michael Chekhov method. Emily Carell is a company member, is trained by Shakespeare and Company. And my training was all in physical theater, not all in physical theater, but a lot in physical theater, with Double Edge, which is the Grotowski Laboratory Theater in Massachusetts. So we all come from these fairly disparate training backgrounds and have come together to synthesize what we think is an aesthetic that, as you say, puts the process ahead of the product. We're all very proud of the product that we create, but what we hear time and again from the artists who work with us is that they don't have an opportunity to go through a process like that with a lot of theaters, certainly not in the state, but anywhere really. We do a very different process, I think, than many. And we also pick shows very purposefully so that they're process-driven shows. So one of the key components of our season planning is, does the show have questions that need to be answered? And while every show has questions that need to be answered, I think how those questions are answered is really an integral part of what KAPOW is. How do we answer questions together as an ensemble? And that then influences what training is going to be necessary to attach that to that product or to that process, and then we end up somewhere. And we almost always end up somewhere with an understanding that we've only gotten about 10% into a huge piece. We tend to do really large shows or really meaty shows, and we have an understanding by the quote-unquote end that we've really only scratched the surface of many of the pieces that we've done.
Yeah. Can you give me an example of one of the shows that you're most proud of that incorporated that process, and kind of give me an overview of what the rehearsal looked like?
Sure.
What was going on there?
Yeah, the show that I referred to as the hinge in our aesthetic was Agamemnon by Aeschylus, and it was translated by Anne Carson, who's a Canadian poet. We tackled the Agamemnon. It's for those of you who don't know, the Agamemnon is 1/3 of the Oresteia, Greek play cycle, and we tackled that piece immediately after my intensive training with Double Edge. And so what we worked on that piece in particular was through something that I would refer to, people at Double Edge might refer to as psychophysical improvisation, improv through the body that ends up, that we end up overlaying onto a scripted piece. So we created in that piece about a 20-minute prologue without text that told the backstory of the Agamemnon, thinking that we might need to provide the audience with some backstory. Not being ancient Greeks themselves, they might need a little bit of the history. And so we created that piece and then attached that piece to a larger piece. We then did the Agamemnon in mask, which was the first time we had done that. So we were working in a series of ways. We brought in a mask artist from Maine, a guy named Michael Clayton, who came and worked with the company on how to use masks. We worked in this physical improv. We worked a lot. My wife is a classicist by training, Greek and Latin major, so we worked a lot on text, and ended up with a piece that I think all of us are still very proud of. We often talk about the Agamemnon because it was an extraordinarily intimate piece, a very low-tech piece, high acting piece, but the aesthetic was very strong, and I think it's one that really changed our history, changed the course of the company, because we went away from some of the parlor dramas that we were doing of Ibsen, Chekhov, and started to move towards a physical expression that I think has now become something of the hallmark of the company.
Was that an unforeseen occurrence, or was that part of what you would consider to be a mandated evolution? Did you see that coming? Was that something you wanted to attain to early on? Did you know you'd get there?
I think that one of the things that I'm very aware of as an artist myself, but also as somebody who's leading a company, at least in part leading a company, is that we live in a very much, I think evolution is good, but the word adapt comes to mind, where we adapt constantly. So we've talked about this several times as a company, we could continue doing what we're doing exactly as we're doing it pretty much forever, as long as the audiences continue to come. But that is not challenging to us as artists and would eventually probably become quite boring. So I was interested in doing some training specifically in dramaturgy, and I started to look for places where I could do dramaturgical work, but as somebody with a job, so I couldn't do it as a degree program or something. And I came across Double Edge, and Double Edge was advertising something they called actor dramaturgy. In other words, the actor-generated work, devised work. And the dramaturgical piece of that was really artist-driven, rather than there being an outside dramaturg who came on and worked with the artists to create something or to help put a piece into context. So when I went and worked with Double Edge, a bit of the hierarchy fell down. So there was no longer playwright, dramaturg, director, actors. There then started to be a group of artists working together to tell a story. And that, I think that really informed what we wanted to do as a company. So while it wasn't planned, it felt very comfortable. And the next year, Carrie went and trained with City Company, which is another company that does a lot of devised work, a lot of actor-created work, and Bogart's company in New York. So she went and trained with them. I had trained with Double Edge, and Peter was training with Michael Chekhov, all kind of at the same time. We were siloed in our training, but we came together and found that our training was this strange Venn diagram with lots of overlaps, and that those overlaps have become the aesthetic core of the company. Like I said, these questions to answer, the simplicity of the work, the answering human issues and problems, speaking to what it is to be human. And when we get into all of that, when we find a script, and we still do this today, where we'll read a script and say, that's a really KAPOW script, or that's not, and none of us can define what that means. We just kind of know at this point this is a script we should do as a company, or a piece we should try to explore as a company. So, yeah, it was not purposeful, but it was right, and I think it was a change that came at the right time, because the state was starting to do a bit more, right? There started to be people looking at Williams or Miller, and so as we had built our name on that, we pivoted a little bit and started to do different work. As other people came into that space, we kind of moved out of it, and we're kind of constantly doing that type of thing, not purposely trying to get out of other people's way, but trying to keep the momentum forward as the company evolves.
You threw about 15 forks in the road.
Sorry.
That's okay. It's all right. Because I thought I was going to go in a certain vein, but there's so many great things about what's happening down there. I'm fascinated by it. Mainly because it seems to me to be an advanced level acting. I talk a lot to people, and we talk theater or stage presentation. Not a whole lot of people get involved in the creativity behind it.
Sure.
And I am just fascinated with what you folks do down there. It really is. It's like a PhD for people who want to learn to act. Well, there's a lot of people who think they can act.
That's true.
But all they're doing is they're just repeating lines, or it's a very surface approach. What I like about what's happening down there is you're folding in so many aspects, touch, sense, movement, that most people don't even begin to understand. I've spoken with folks who, let me back up. There are certain directors who like to micromanage and say, okay, on line 5, you need to take 5 steps, turn on the lamp, pick up the pencil, and then on the 3rd word, you say this. There are others who will say, okay, you need to get from point A to point B, go.
Right.
That part I like, because that's creativity for me. I can get in there and I can jump on the furniture on my way over, I can be on one leg, I can blink, I can do whatever I need to do. And that's what I think you folks really bring out, that there are real people doing real things, and you need to mine that. And I talk about that process, because and I can't even begin to get into everything you guys are doing down there. It's just fascinating.
Thank you. A lot of that is I think who we are, and we do get, as you can imagine, I'm sure, we have people come work with the company and then think this isn't what I want to do, because it makes them ask questions of themselves as artists, and it makes them work a little harder perhaps than I too have seen the directors with prompt books that they've drawn out all of their blocking, and it's like, you're going to go here and then you're going to go here. It's like an unforgivable sin to me to imagine ever doing that to an actor. So much so that KAPOW, I think, we've had conversations with actors in space where we say, where do the walls need to be? Like they're involved in the process to the point where they say, I really need to make a long entrance from a staircase, so I need that to be a 20-foot staircase. And you say, okay, well that's starting to inform design. And I think when we're there, when we're in that kind of magic world, it's extraordinarily scary, let me tell you, because then you're like, okay, we're knocking out a wall, we're moving stuff around to work with an actor and what they feel like they might need. And so oftentimes as a director, I think it's John Lithgow who said that a good director is an objective outside eye, and that is pretty much what I take as my role as director. I can see the stage from the audience's perspective, and you can't. And so I can tell you, this isn't working. This isn't the spatial relationship we want. This isn't the stage picture I want. And we're not telling the story, right? And the actor's work often is, as you said, on character or on motivation. I hate that term, but on intent. And my work then is how to put those pieces together. We tell a story all the time because it's a it's again kind of one of our mythological stories, but we were in rehearsal for Strindberg's Dream Play, which is, people have said historically an impossible play to stage. It's a very difficult play to stage. I don't think impossible, but very difficult. And we had decided that we wanted to suspend a door from the fly loft so that it was visible to the audience, but they were looking up at a closed door. Then we realized about halfway into the rehearsal process that we needed to open this door. And we talked for quite a while about how the hell do we open a door that's flown overhead. And Peter, as he often does, kind of, an idea hits Peter very physically. You see him kind of jump. And I said, yes, Peter, what is the idea? And he said, what we need is we need a trained dove to open the door. And we laughed, and we still laugh about this moment. Of course, we did not end up with a trained dove to open the door, but our company now has what we call trained dove moments. What we need is a trained dove. And we just did Shipwrecked with Peter, I guess in February. We closed it. We closed it in the first weekend of March. But it's just full of, it's Donna Margulies' script is just full of these trained dove moments. We got to figure out how a guy becomes a dog and then a pearl diver and then, and just moves around. And so that's become something that we really pride ourselves on, these, as I said, these trained dove moments. What is the, Occam's razor says that the easiest answer is probably the best one. Oftentimes with the KAPOW show, you're like, what's the craziest answer? Okay, we can't do that, but what is just shy of trained dove? And we ended up opening that door in a dream play with a group of actors kind of standing on one another to create a pile of people high enough to get to that door and open it. So that's the way that I think we like to approach work. Generally speaking, I want to work with people who want to be lifelong learners, and this can be another issue with, I probably don't need to tell you, but there are a lot of actors in New Hampshire and elsewhere in the region who think that they're done, that they know it, and that they don't really need to be told or taught or trained any further. One of the great things about working with this company is that while none of us are very young, all of us still have that curiosity and excitement and interest in learning more and more and more and more, and that's why we continue to train, continue to explore different methods of theater creation, continue to challenge each other to try something new. So that's what so far, knock on wood, makes us work. So
you people are very deeply respectful of the actors. I think that's, I don't want to say it's not common, but I think a lot of times the actors are just considered another component, like furniture. I need to move them here, and I think it's unfortunate because the growth that you're offering actors is tremendous to me, if someone wanted to take that step. So you're training not just yourselves, you have open training.
we do.
What kind of people show up? What do they find out? And what type of growth can they expect from you have some really interesting
That's a word.
training.
I have a friend, an Italian friend, a woman, mind you, who says, interesting is a pregnant woman. And what she means by that is that what does interesting mean? Interesting is nothing.
Yeah.
Yes, we do open training once a month. The open training, the thought process behind the open training is that Theater KAPOW was feeling a little bit like a theater cult, that nobody knew what the heck we did, and so we wanted to open up the types of training that we're doing in our rehearsal room or part of our process. We wanted to open that up to people so they could come see it, and they could come see like, oh, these people aren't, Kool-Aid drinkers. They're not crazy. And so I don't know that we convinced anybody of that, by the way. But,
Thanks, I was going to go there.
But so we do these open trainings in Manchester, in a studio in Manchester, the third Saturday of every month, 2 hours. And the training could be anything for the past several years, it's either been led by Carrie, who would do training in viewpoints or practical aesthetics, Peter, who would do training in Chekhov, or me, and I would do training, either a double-edged Grotowski-based training, or my most recent training is a couple of things with, I went and worked with La Mama in Italy on 2 different types of training, one being dance theater and one being very old school Stanislavski-based actor training. So we'll do one of those. Usually one of us will lead it. Now Emily might lead a training in Shakespeare and Co. or Jimmy, or we've got more artists involved kind of in the process of leading trainings. And we've just started, we've done it before, but we're starting to make it a little bit more formalized, where we're going to have visiting artists coming and doing trainings. And we have one, a little pitch is we have one May 10th with Deb Kinghorn from UNH doing a training. She is a...
Is that the Kinesetics?
Yeah, the Kinesetics, and she's a Lessac trained facilitator, is that the right word? So what people are going to see, well, let me answer one question. Who comes? It's amazing who comes. We have had, I'd say we've had people from 16 to 76 or so. We do fairly regularly get somebody who walks in off the street in Manchester and says, I'm here, I'm just interested in doing this for a day. We've kept the price very low. It's $5 a head, so you can come in and spend 2 hours with us, and it's $5. Yeah,
$5.
$5. What a deal!
Yeah.
So they'll come in off the street. They'll spend $5 with us, and usually they have no idea what they're getting themselves into. They see the word theater, they see training, and they come and they spend their $5 and come, and then they spend, 2 hours jumping on one foot, and they're like, "What did that have to do with theater?" That doesn't happen as much anymore as we all age. But anyways, we do. So we do many different types of training. We've had high school kids, we've had college kids. As I said, we've had members of the theater community who've just kind of been interested in finding out more about Theater KAPOW and who we are. It was only a couple years ago that we got involved in the theater awards, and then our name kind of got said a lot on stage, and people were like, oh, Theater KAPOW, and suddenly our training numbers went up, especially when we told people we tend to pick actors out of our training pool. So we ended up with a lot of community theater actors or student actors or whoever there is locally who might just be interested in coming by and checking out what we're doing. And then I'm always surprised we do get somebody who did theater 50 years ago in high school and they want to just retouch with it, and they'll come in. We've had some great experiences that way, honestly. We've had dancers come by because there's just not a lot of dance opportunities locally, so they know that we do a physical training, they're interested in that type of work, they'll come in. And when you can get a high school kid and an older person, let's say, and a trained dancer all in the room at the same time, exploring something, it's awesome. It's like, it gives me chills. I love those moments. And so I would say to you or to anyone, come check it out, because I think a lot of people do get a little intimidated by what are they going to do for 2 hours. And honestly, we do very little of here's a scene, we're going to read a scene and analyze it. We just don't do that type of work in training. We'll do here's a scene, what's happening physically with the actor. We'll do an open scene, or we'll do no text at all, or we'll take a poem and we'll create a piece using a poem, or we'll work with music, or so any of those other types of things. And then we always try to look at transferable skills. So like, we've taught you how to explore a poem and mine that poem for movement. Well, now you're going to go back to your local theater company and you guys are doing Shakespeare or whatever. Can you mine Shakespeare the same way for movement? Can that inform your character? So I hope we do that. And then jumping out of that, we started a retreat a few years ago out in Dunbarton, where we would just go out for a week and train for a week, bring in guest artists and train. And we've had a lot of people come spend a day with us on the farm in Dunbarton and do stuff. And it's fun. I mean, I don't know. There's something about just training the work There's no pressure for there to be an audience at the end of it, you know, like it's just retouching. Oftentimes we end a 2-hour open training and we're just like, it's just a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun, and it's beautiful work, and more often than not somebody leaves there like a completely transformed disciple, and they're like, well, I need to come back and do this again. And again, it's $5, but there's no real loss to them. So
when I was in high school, for lack of a better term, in theater, we did these games, theater games. And what I like about what you guys are doing, to you folks down there are doing, it's very liberating. So many people want to be an actor, but they're very restrained. They don't understand the freedom that they need to have to be creative. And even just doing movement exercises breaks down a barrier. Something that they wouldn't normally think they would do on stage or need on stage. Now they have this new freedom, and that they can implement this tool almost. I like to think of theater as an adult playground, a place where now as adults we can go and we have our own playground area, where as a child you went, and part of your goal as a kid was you wanted to go on the slides, you wanted to go on the swings, you wanted to go on the seesaw, you wanted to go on the go-arounder thing, and we don't have that as adults.
Right.
And what I love about theater and the creative process is if you work it properly, you go and you get to touch all the things on the playground. And you become a much fuller actor.
Yeah, and I think kids aren't jumping on the slide or the go-arounder thing. They're sliding down the side of a mountain, or they're running away from pirates, or they're, you know what I mean? Like, that's the thing that I'm a big fan of Sir Ken Robinson, but he did an experiment once where he went into a kindergarten classroom and he asked them, how many of you consider yourselves artists? And every kid in the room raised their hand. It then goes to a senior and high school classroom and says, how many of you are artists? And 1 or 2 kids raise their hand. So what happens in between is that we beat creativity out of people. We squash it. We make it something that they're embarrassed about or that they're ashamed of. And then so they're not exploring it. Another Ken Robinson, I can't quote him, but another thing he said once was, the average person can come up with about 12 to 15 uses for a paperclip. And we can imagine that a paperclip, I could bend it, I could maybe pick a lock with it, I could create shapes out of it. He said a creative can come up with 150 uses for a paperclip. And the reason is they'll start asking questions about the paperclip. And they'll say things like, well, what if the paperclip is 130 feet tall and made out of foam? Then we can do different things with the paperclip than what you think. And so this is what we hope, if you come work with theater. I hope that of all theater artists, I don't care if you work with us or not, ask those questions, you know, constantly be pushing yourself to be creative, because there's nothing super interesting about reading and following the stage directions as published in the script, you know? And so, you're right, that's what we do. We play a lot. It's called play, you know?
Right. Thank you.
So.
Yeah. It's so important. It's so important. I have to admit, I'm guilty of the artist thing, because I'm 64, and it's only been in the last year or two where I've actually considered myself an artist.
Mm-hmm.
Just really, it's shameful on one level.
Every time I say I'm a theater artist, part of me goes, "No, you're not."
Right.
Every time, it doesn't matter. It's you know, you have to kind of. What Anne Bogart says, you speak something into existence. Speak it into existence.
I had to actually delve into what I thought in my own head was the definition of an artist, and I had to migrate away. You know, I have no problem seeing someone paint and go, "That's an artist," or sculpt, and I go, "Oh, that's an artist." In theater or acting, I had a hard time migrating that over. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. Well, in part probably because if a director's saying, move here, say it this way, do this, are you an artist, you know,
Right.
or are you somebody else's pawn in a game? But,
Yeah, you're just a monkey.
Yeah.
Are you happy with where you folks are?
always want more, you know, and that's yes, no, I'm extraordinarily humbled by how far the company's come. In year one, I tell people all the time, I knew everybody in the audience, half of them were related to me. I have a large family, so that's not an exaggeration. In year 11, more often than not, I don't know anybody in the audience. Not more often than not, but often. I don't know anybody there. They're people who are taking a chance on the company, or they're fans, they're patrons, they're funders, but they're not friends or family like they used to be when we started, and that is extraordinarily humbling and gratifying as we become important to people, not just because they have a personal relationship with us, but because they have a relationship with the company. That's the best. That's awesome. We're always hungry for more, you know, and what comes next. And as I said, this idea of where do we go from here as a company is a conversation that we have. We are currently having very much so, like, what's next? We expanded from 3 company members, Carrie, Peter, and I. We added Emily, and then this past year we added 3 additional, Jimmy Stewart, Tava Young, and Rachel Longo all came on as company members. So we've built the core a little larger in hopes that kind of the more creative brain power we can throw at the company, the more limitless our opportunities and our potential becomes. And so we're still stepping in that new territory of a heavily creative space and what that means. We're working on a project that's a fairly significant international collaboration to be produced in 2020, and that's taking a lot of my energy and focus right now, but it also, I think, is represents another kind of shift in our company and what we're doing. So yes, happy, but also never satisfied.
Yeah, that's good. So I took a fork in the road a little while back, and now you've thrown 5 more in the road. So I'm going to take the one that I think I can jump off of easiest.
Okay.
How you touched on the audience. You folks have a very niche market.
Yes.
But it's definitely rich.
Mm-hmm.
I've always felt for a long time that there were not enough small black box theaters. I know they tend not to be profitable, but there are people who will go to see something they've never heard of.
Yes.
They
A
are
lot of them.
Die-hard fans. Yeah, right, I know. And that was going to bring that up too. And so you're filling this beautiful opening that exists because not everybody wants to go see Oliver.
Yeah.
Annie. You know. What is the biggest obstacle for you in going in that direction? What are you most afraid of happening or not happening as you pick up a project, you find a cast? Are you afraid would no audience being there, or no place to do it, or what?
Yeah. So you threw a bunch of forks at me. So that's fair. No, 100%. You worry that nobody's going to care. You know that you're going to be a tree falling in the forest and it doesn't make a sound. You know, or you're a pebble thrown in a pond and it doesn't ripple anywhere. So I think you want people in the audience. I mean, as much as we love the process, I will always say to my actors and also to my students, as I do teach theater as well, that like the theater is a circuit, right? And that circuit is not completed until you have the audience. Film actors have the benefit of throwing something in a can and then walking away from it, and whether or not they have a good audience or a bad audience, their performance doesn't change. Theater actors 100% feed off of the energy provided to them by the audience. So it's important that there be people in the house. So that's always an obstacle. You know, sometimes we'll pick a show. I'm really proud of the fact that in 11 years we've never picked a show knowing that we're going to sell tickets. You know, we don't pick shows thinking this is going to be a crowd pleaser. You know, we just
Yeah.
don't have to do that. And like you, I have a lot of friends who run and theater companies around the state, and man, I feel so bad for them most of the time because they find themselves in that programming situation where they're like, I gotta do Annie, you know.
Yes.
And I don't have to do that, but I think the reason is that our scale has remained so small. We very trying to think of like, I think a typical KAPOW audience configuration is about 60 seats, maybe less. If we get 12 people on a Sunday matinee, it doesn't put us out of business, you know, where at some of these bigger companies where they've got 900 seats to fill, you know, a matinee with 30 people is like, you know, they can't pay bills.
Yeah.
So we, just by the economy of scale and staying really, really small, we've provided, I think we've found a little space where we can be pretty comfortable. We know at this point how much it's going to cost us to put on a show. We know roughly how many people are going to come. And sometimes we have shows that do better, and sometimes we have shows that do worse. But the company is, in no small part because Carrie is a business whiz who's kept us has kept us very solvent over the years, and has a really good understanding of where things are trending and where things have been. And so she's always managing to keep us above the board in terms of our finances. She would hate that I said that. Sorry. Yeah, so obviously, like every theater company, people buy in. As you said, we do shows that a lot of people have never heard of, although that's not always true. But I think that we want an audience who has brand loyalty to Theater KAPOW and not to William Shakespeare or, you know, Edward Albee. Like, they're coming because they know that we're going to put on a good show, and they don't care if they haven't heard of who wrote it. So, yeah, that's obvious. That's our challenge.
Are there projects out there that you really want to get to? They're just either time or resources are preventing it? Something that you're like, man, I have got to get this show done.
Dozens and dozens of them, yeah. I mean,
Dozens?
Probably dozens, yeah. Peter's a big Chekhov guy. Peter Josephson loves Chekhov, and every year he says like, hey, can we do a Chekhov? Well, Chekhov wrote really big plays, right? Not huge plays, but you know, for us, this is another thing about economy of scale. The typical Theater KAPOW cast is probably 5 to 7 people. Chekhov is writing plays for 17 to 22 people, and so we don't tend to explore that type of work. I think there would be some interest, certainly from Peter, but other people in the company about what does KAPOW look like on a grander scale. You know, could we blow the walls out a little bit bigger and do some bigger work? Then there's work. You know, we've been pretty committed to new work, not. We do a new play project of some sort about every other year, and I think all of us would like to see some more of that. It's tricky because there's a lot. I'm not speaking ill of anybody in particular, but there's a lot of really kind of bad new work. So it's about finding, you know, there's no inherent value to new. You still want to be sticking to your mission, which our mission is the great works of dramatic literature. Well, there's not a lot of great works of brand new dramatic literature, at least not that we get access to. So I think we'd like to do some more of that type of work. But yeah, so there's lots of things. And this we're doing a project right now that's a 2-year project we're developing that is it's taking elements of Ibsen's Peer Gynt and incorporating elements of the life and story of a Norwegian painter named Per Krogh and throwing them together. And that's just this massive project that involves collaborators. We have a composer from Ireland and a puppet company from New York, who's actually a Czechoslovakian puppet company, and we're working with some people, some names like Tim Lecuyer is doing the dramaturgy for us, and we're talking to AJ Diddy about doing some writing for us. So like all of that stuff is now, in the next probably 5 weeks, starting to come together as a group of collaborators to create this new piece, and that's a piece that we're pretty excited about. And I think there's probably, dozens, maybe an exaggeration, but there's probably another 10 of those types of projects that are in the hopper of the minds of one of the company members. So, we'll see what happens.
You also have another leg of what you folks do with staged readings.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
It's the craziest thing, because I don't think we ever expected it to be as popular as it is. Carrie works at the Currier Museum of Art in Manchester, and approached the museum a couple years ago about an idea she had, which was, could we do play readings of plays that related in some way to objects in the museum's collection. So as you start to think about these things, like plays that we know of about art, like say the play Art, or John Logan, wrote a play called Red, about Mark Rothko. We did a play, one of the first seasons we did Donald Margulies' Time Stands Still, which is about a war photographer. So we again, Carrie, finding scripts about artists, and then making the tie to the Currier's collection or special exhibitions. And we were funded, in the first 3 years of doing it, we were funded by the New Hampshire Humanities Council to do these play readings on Sunday afternoons at the Currier, and we do 3 a year. And it's shocking how well attended they are. It's a Sunday afternoon. We will get 70 to 80 people.
No kidding.
No, yeah, I'm not kidding. It's crazy. And they'll come, they'll sit, they'll watch the play. They'll then stay. We'll have an expert facilitated talk back following the performance. And the most remarkable thing is that we have developed a play reading audience that's a little bit independent from the shows that we put on. So we have people who come to every single play reading, but don't drive down to Derry and see one of our full-scale productions. We have some people who do both. But there's a very active, interested group of people in just seeing a play read. And we also do it extraordinarily bare-boned, 2 or 3 actors and music stands, no scenery, no props, no nothing. Nobody's off book, no lines to learn.
No blocking.
No blocking, or very limited blocking. I would say no blocking. Occasionally somebody, has to be off stage, so they leave. But it's become, in Theatre KAPOW terms, just wildly successful that we're doing these play readings, and we get tons and tons. Again, a bigger company would be like, 70 people, I'm losing my mind. But for us, to have 70 people on a Sunday afternoon at a play reading is a big deal. So, we have one coming up. We're doing an Athol Fulgard play called The Painted Rocks on Revolver Creek. And it's a gorgeous play about art and class and race in South Africa, apartheid era South Africa. And so that's coming up at the Currier Museum in a couple weeks. And they're very popular.
Is there a charge for that?
There is not. So the plays themselves are free with museum admission. So if you're a member of the Currier, you don't pay for museum admission anyway. So a lot of the people who will come to the play readings are members. They'll use their membership, come in and see the show. Some of the people that are maybe more KAPOW fans than Currier fans will pay the museum admission rate, come see the show, but also make a day at the museum, and they'll go and see the artwork. We are extraordinarily blessed as a state, I think, to have a museum the quality of the Currier. live about a quarter mile from the front door, and I often think to myself, there's a Picasso a quarter mile from my house, you know, and there's a Monet a quarter mile from my house, you know, and I'm a member, so, you know, I can walk in there and see it for free any day I want. And it's an extraordinary thing that I think people take for granted sometimes. So, you know, I don't know what museum admission is, and I'd hate to misquote it, but I'm guessing it's something like $12. So you spend your $12, you go see some beautiful art, you see a 2-hour play reading. It's still going to be a pretty cheap date on a Sunday afternoon. So.
And a great one.
Yeah, yeah.
Looking back, is there something you wish you knew back whenever that you know now, that you would have liked to incorporate it either into your life or into your theater background? You say, boy, I wish I knew that back then.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I often think, because now I teach high school theater classes, and I often kind of wonder about the 4 years that I took off to be an athlete, and I just didn't do any theater. I was thinking about it on my drive up here, like, you know, how different would my life be if I didn't stop at Andy's after 7 years, but I was there for 9, you know, or if I had allowed myself that kind of love of theater through high school, where would I be? You know, would things be different? But probably they would be, because I was certainly on track to be somebody who went and majored in theater. As it turns out, I didn't. I went to St. Anselm College as a biochemistry major initially, and then changed that very quickly once I realized biochemistry is wicked hard, and became an English major, perhaps, you know, my native language, so I could handle that, and that, you know, I don't regret anything, because it all, you know, I met my wife at St. A's. Dr. Magnuson at St. A's is still just one of the closest friends I have, but also now he's been a KAPOW supporter and board member since we started the company. I wouldn't know the people I know without having gone the path that I did. But yeah, I would say as a young company, there were lots of things we could have done differently. And most of them are just aesthetic. Like, sometimes I look back at pictures of our shows and I'm like, ugh, like, we wouldn't do that today, you know, and it, that's just the growing pains of being a young company with, in those early years, you know, it was the Cahoon bank account that was mostly putting these shows up on the stage. So it was like, what can we afford to do? And now I think now that the company's got a little bit more, there's still a lot of Cahoon bank account, but now that the company's got a little bit more self-sufficiency, we're happier with the way things look. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's a hard question to answer, because I ended up here, you know, and it's like, I'm in a decent place. I like where we are, and Carrie and I have a daughter, Emma, who's a theater lover. Who I think they say you've got no choice, right? Like, either you're going to hate theater if you've got theater parents, or you've got no choice but to just give into it. And she's given into it in a very big way, and she's going to university. She's going to the Royal Scottish Conservatory this summer for actor training program herself, and then and looking at colleges to go to next year. And so I'm getting to live that. I'm a high school kid who loves theater, and now I get to pick which college I'm going to go to major in theater. I get to live that through her a little bit. So I got it eventually, right? It just took 20 some odd years. So.
Is there anything about KAPOW that you want people to know that we haven't maybe covered, that you say, I got to get this in before we close?
Yeah, well, there's a couple things. I think first, and we've touched upon it before, but I promise you we're not that scary. So come work with us if you're interested in doing so, or certainly come see the work if you're interested in doing so. But I think the thing that I was reflecting upon a little bit last night was that we're all standing on the shoulders of giants to an extent, and none of us got to where we are without serious help from people along the way. And I do think about, our early days coming out of the Palace. I do think about Yellow Taxi and the legitimately groundbreaking work that Suzanne was doing with that company, and really shifting the mindset of New Hampshire audiences to allow space for something like Theater KAPOW to happen. I think about how fortunate I am to work at Pinkerton, and what that has meant for the company in terms of support, not only from students and faculty, but also in terms of facility for rehearsals and performances. I think about the Arts Council in Derry we're a partner down there that's been extraordinarily generous, and I think gets a pretty big kick out of the way that we manipulate the Derry Opera House. And I've already talked about people like Dr. Magnuson or Norm St. Germain from APS Lighting in Merrimack, who, Norm's one of my best friends and has been for 20 years. But without him, the company doesn't exist. We get a ton of support in terms of lighting and sound equipment from him. So it's that cliche of it taking a village to raise a child, but probably the brattiest and most obnoxious child is a theater company. It really takes a pretty decent sized village to raise it. And to say one thing about Theater KAPOW would be that we all are just walking the paths that were blazed by others before us. So I'm really grateful for that, and hopefully we are modeling some of that for people coming up behind us.
You may have actually expounded on some of what my next question is, but if you could give a TED Talk, what would you speak about?
I would 100% talk about, I'm lucky because I get to do this almost every day in the classroom, but I'd talk about why it's important that we teach kids theater. And it has very little to do with acting or scenic design, or what it has to do with is empathy, learning what it is that makes us human, and having an understanding that you prick me and I bleed, and not only that, but that my blood is the same color as your blood regardless of the color of the outside of my body, or my religion or my orientation. And I am working a lot right now. I'm fairly new as a theater teacher. I've been working at Pinkerton for 15 years, but only been teaching there for 1. And we do something called enduring understandings. In other words, what do the students get out of your class that is something that when they're 50 years old, they're going to look back and they're going to know that that's endured, that understanding, that lesson from your class is endured. And I've broken my class up into 3 basic understandings, which is just know yourself, know your audience, and know each other. And if we could all know ourselves, truly know ourselves, if we can know the people who watch us, our audience, and if we can get to know each other, then man, we're going to live in a better world. So that's my TED Talk in 2 minutes.
No, that's good. That encapsulated it well.